Put a glide in your stride and a dip in your hip and come onto the mothership with Stone Fruit and Mark French delivering the hard line. And it doesn't get any harder than 9/11. Today we're going to be discussing the motive behind 9/11, Mr. French. How are you doing from the great Lone Star State?
I'm not quite sure how great it is, but I'm fine, man. Thank you for asking.
The rapidly suburbanizing Lone Star State.
Yeah, different than it was when I first started showing up 15 years ago, and I've heard stories how much different it is back from the old days of when Dallas was on TV in the early 80s.
I've been coming and going from in El Paso from the 80s and Austin from the late 80s.
Sure.
All right, let's get right into it. 9/11. We just passed the anniversary, but it's an evergreen topic because even though it was 22 years ago, it remains as relevant today as the JFK assassination, which is even older.
Well, it's funny that you say that because there's some elements and the playbook there are very similar, and there's still some guys that are alive that by proxy, not very many degrees of separation of who was involved. It's so they're, this has been in play for a real long time.
Yes, and some of the people that are involved in 9/11 were probably involved in JFK.
That's right.
Made
their careers on it.
Yeah. So there's a crawl on the bottom of the screen for our 5 viewers, 911 motive at stonefruit.substack.com. As usual, our podcasts are accompanied with text. And I thought that we should engage with 9/11 because I'm on Twitter far more than one needs to be. And I'm starting to see a lot of 9/11 threads get some legs.
Sure.
And I think a lot of people are sick and tired of the pandemic narrative management. And now that it's kind of settled, they see that it is a collusion between big tech, intelligence, the corporatist Democrats, and in the case of pandemic in particular, big pharma, CDC, NIH. So I think they're casting a similarly skeptical eye towards 9/11. So
I think that's a good point too. And the pandemic basically calcifying some healthy skepticism since Iraq and Afghanistan. I mean, you can only bungle and mismanage so many giant things where people finally take a second and pause and just go, what's really going on here? This many powerful, rich Ivy League people cannot possibly be this stupid. So the only other thing could be is there's something purposeful going on here, right? I mean, so pandemic, yes, certainly.
And RFK's presidential campaign has brought the assassinations of his father and his uncle back to light. And he does not think Sirhan killed his father. But that's right. Let's bracket that and keep our focus on the enormous topic of 9/11.
9/11 is enough of its own accord. Yep.
Yeah. So everyone had all the 9/11 truthers have their aha moment when they realized there was something fishy about the official conspiracy theory. What was yours, Mark?
Well, at that time, I had just had a 2-year stint with a demolition company. We were one of the only companies licensed to follow the one company that was licensed in that whole entire area to blow buildings up and then clean them up. So I had territory from Detroit, sometimes all the way over to Pittsburgh or Philly, sometimes all the way over to Chicago, and sometimes all the way down to the Kentucky-Indiana border. So there were numerous buildings throughout the Midwest and Rust Belt, if you will, that I was directly on site when those takedowns happened, and then had to clean them all up and pick them apart. And a lot of the steel at that time was already going over to China. That was happening a lot. A lot of the buildings that were coming down in that area, all of the copper, all of the brass, everything that was worth anything, we had to pick that stuff apart, separate it from the concrete and other scrap, and then off it went to get to a junkyard, and then loaded onto trains and eventually boats and sent over to China. So just the morning that it happened, I hardly ever watched the news. For whatever reason, the first thing I did was turn on the TV, and that was extremely unusual for me on one of my very infrequent days off. So saw it with my own two eyes. I knew it was going to be a thing. I knew it was a big deal. I wasn't very political at that time in my life. Didn't really have any time or care or concern for what the federal government was doing, but I knew that was going to be around for a while. And just the way that those buildings fell, I was like, that is not, that could not mathematically, as a matter of material science and physics, that did not just happen from an airplane. And then later that day or the next day, when I heard that another building fell that did not get hit by an airplane, then I was really like, okay, what the hell is going on in New York today?
Okay, so as a demolition professional, you knew it was fishy day one.
Yeah, as soon as I saw it, I was just like, that's not normal. That's extremely unusual. I mean, obviously, I've never seen a jetliner with my own two eyes crash into something, but just I knew those buildings. I like, having paid attention to that style of architecture my entire life. I knew there's just buildings don't fall like that unless you purposely blow them up. They just don't.
I had a different approach and a different, more delayed aha moment. I was living in a tree above the University of Hawaii the day of, and a friend walked the 10 or 15 minutes up the street to my tree up a ridge trail and told me what happened. And I turned on my little shortwave radio and pulled in the local FM and the college radio, and they said, our hearts are with everybody in New York City and all that. And I didn't leave my tree that day, so I didn't see it repeated endlessly all day. And for a year, I believed the official conspiracy theory. I figure you arm, train, and fund a monster. Don't be surprised if he acts monstrously, because Osama bin Laden was America's terrorist in Chechnya, Bosnia, Afghanistan, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
And it was not until about a year after, when my ex-wife and I were walking around the campus of University of Hawaii, and hung on the walls of the campus center was butcher paper upon which everyone could write their sentiments. And I looked at a couple, and I knew that they would all be some version either of, let's go nuke us some sand N-words, or they're in our thoughts and prayers, both equally superficial responses to it. So I read a few more. I started wandering off. And my ex-wife, she's pointing at one. She's waving me back and pointing at this one that I need to read. And it said, the bin Laden and Bush families have made millions together for years through the Carlyle Group. And I was, what's that you're saying?
Yeah.
And at the time, Honolulu and Austin, Texas were the test markets for the first cable modem for Time Warner in the country.
Mhm.
So at that time, we had the fastest internet in the country, and I put it to work researching this 16 hours a day for 2 months. And it wasn't long before I was, holy shit, I can't believe it. It's the depth of which and the complexity of which we'll get into. But
Yeah.
it was 2 months, and then I was up, unplugged. I went to Kauai and go camped on Kalalau Valley in Nepali coast so that I could just return to nature and avoid a permanent psychotic break.
Yeah, seriously.
And for the next year and a half, I would buttonhole everybody about my theories on 9/11. And I
Mhm.
could tell eventually that I was just being a tedious asshole. So my stance came to be just World Trade Center 7. Just look into World Trade Center 7.
Sure.
Let's try and bring up our first element. Hey, look at that.
Sharp. Looks great.
Thank you. So, World Trade Center 1 and 2, never forget. World Trade Center 7, forget.
Yeah. Right.
It was, I believe, 66 stories. It would have been the largest building in over 30 states at the time.
Mhm.
Not a small building. And it too exhibited characteristics of controlled demolition. And let's run through a few and see if you, as a demolition professional, think that they ring true. Rapid onset of collapse,
Sure.
sounds of explosions, symmetrical structural failure, free fall acceleration, imploded, collapsing completely into its own footprint, massive expanding pyroclastic clouds, corroboration from external experts. There's a Dutch guy in particular who's just dumbfounded. Wow, this is professional. And foreknowledge from the media, NYPD, and the New York Fire Department. So after buttonholing people for a while, I just say World Trade Center 7 and let them do their own research and just take a step back.
Of course.
But before we really delve into motive, let's look at, let's not forget that in July 28, 1945, a 10-ton B-25 Mitchell bomber hit the Empire State Building.
Mhm.
Now, a B-25 is considerably smaller than a 757, but it's a precedent, and Empire State Building didn't fall.
Right.
So now we can get into the meat of it. And I would encourage our 5 listeners to go to stonefruit.substack.com because we have links to not only all the evidence and the papers and books, but there's some videos. Like even John Forbes Carey. John Carey is a Forbes. He was at a bookstore doing an event with his wife, Heinz. I forget her first name. She's the heir to the Heinz fortune.
Mhm.
Carey said World Trade Center 7 was brought down in a controlled fashion. That's the exact quote. It's also not mentioned in the 9/11 Commission report at all.
Yeah.
So this series will focus on motive, means, and opportunity, which is the handy-dandy criminal forensics slogan to utilize when investigating a criminal case. And we have all 3 up at stonefruit.substack.com, but this episode will be focusing on motive. So let's get our first candidate as a motive. Let's create a new enemy.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if the hijackers really wanted to do damage, they could have just stopped 30 miles north and crashed into the Indian Point nuclear power plant and rendered the entire Northeast uninhabitable for the rest of human existence on planet Earth. But that would have been a little too much, because they still needed the Wall Street, New York City, as the empire's financial capital to remain functional, but they needed a televisual, trauma-based mind control spectacle to create a new enemy and to create subservience for all the other motives that we're going to discuss today.
Yeah.
And one of my favorite writers and prognosticators, A1 George Orwell, had a little something to say about it.
Mm-hmm.
Which was his definition of totalitarianism. And this comes from the YouTube movie Every War is a Rich Man's Trick, from JFK to 9/11. It's a superlative movie, and in it he has Orwell defining totalitarianism as a society living by and for continuous warfare in which the ruling caste have ceased to have any function but succeed in clinging to power through force and fraud. Now, I think that is a good place to start, and I think it describes the world we are in pretty accurately. So let's consider who wanted the enemy. Who was the most militaristic group in power at the time of 9/11? The neoconservatives.
Yeah. Yeah. Cheney, Rumsfeld, they were all there.
But we can take it a step back to
there you go.
To David Rockefeller.
Yeah.
He was the third generation of John D. Rockefeller's oil fortune. And he created Chase Manhattan, which was a bank central to the petrodollar, in which this fella, Henry Kissinger, who still walks among us, 1912 to he still walks among us. Only the good die young.
Yeah.
In 1973, 2 years after America went off the gold standard, he went to Saudi Arabia and said, price your oil in dollars in exchange for our security guarantee. That is the essence of the petrodollar, and that is breaking down as we speak today in 2023. But a lot of that went through Chase Manhattan. And Rockefeller, being no fool and being the patriarch of his generation, covered his bases by creating a national security advisor for both the left and the right, Zbigniew Brzezinski and Henry Kissinger. And it's worth a little bit of background into their mutual careers. Harvard offered an associate professorship to Henry Kissinger in 1959 instead of Brzezinski. So he went to New York to teach at Columbia from 1956 to 58. And here's how Rockefeller cultivated them. From 1956 to 58, Kissinger worked for the Rockefeller Brothers Fund as the director of its Special Studies Project. That was his payout and his initial rise to prominence. Brzezinski co-founded the Trilateral Commission with David Rockefeller and was director from 73 to 76. That was his leg up in the world, although he'd served in LBJ's administration. The Trilateral Commission unites the interests of Japan, Europe, and United States. And let's take a little waltz down memory lane, Mark. Let's look at the genealogy of the neoconservatives. Because I am a true Nietzschean, a Nietzsche aficionado, and I believe in genealogizing every intellectual concept that can be. So Irving Kristol, Bill Kristol's dad, Bill Kristol, who keeps failing upward. His dad, Irving Kristol, is usually called the godfather of neoconservatives.
Well, and before you jump all the way into this, the
Yes.
other great thing about the work that you're doing, treating these things like crimes is so important because they were. So in any whodunit, there has to be the who. So I think it's extremely important the way you're laying this out for the general public and other genuinely interested people is, at the end of the day, it's not hard to find who was involved. This is not just some ethereal thing falling from the sky. This is not some kind of divine providence. These people, they are human beings that are amongst us. They planned this. It was on purpose. So I think it's really cool in this series and the work that you've been doing recently to really connect it to the actual human beings that were involved, either in the shadows or as a matter of direct policy.
I think that's the only way to go about it. These people have names and addresses, and they can be ascertained. And people will be named in the motive portion, the means portion, and the opportunity portion. And let's resume our genealogization of neoconservatism. So Kristol founded the Public Interest magazine in the 60s with Daniel Bell, and it focused on domestic policy. Norman Poderhertz had another magazine called Commentary, and that oriented more towards foreign policy. Now, neoconservatism was a democratic reaction against the new left of the 1960s and against McGovern's losing presidential campaign in 1972. It's important to note that these guys started out as Democrats. And their key planks were to the diminution of LBJ's Great Society, social spending, opposition to affirmative action and other types of social engineering, but also quashing any dove-like tendencies in foreign policy, because the 70s was an era when arms control talks were successful. And another big plank was a quote-unquote strong Israel. Let the hardline elements in Israel do whatever they want. So they had a little ad hoc organization called the Coalition for the Democratic Majority that was prominent in the early 70s. And those two magazines, Commentary and Public Interest, especially Commentary with its emphasis on the foreign policy, and the offices of Democratic Senator Henry Scoop Jackson.
Yeah.
Now, Scoop Jackson ran for president in 72 and 76. And he was a bit of a hawk because he was the senator from Washington.
Yeah.
And Boeing has always had a place of esteem in the military-industrial complex.
Still do.
Yes, even though they can't keep the 766, is it, from falling out of the sky?
Yeah.
But in Scoop Jackson's office were a number of people that would become the core of the neoconservatives.
Yeah.
And these include names that will be very familiar to people that follow this tribe: Richard Pearl,
Yeah.
Paul Wolfowitz, Elliot Abrams, who, like a bad penny, keeps returning. Biden just appointed him to some foreign policy review board 2 or 3 months ago.
Right after he just bungled the Venezuela overthrow again.
Failing upward, these guys.
Yeah.
And another guy that was in Jackson's office was Doug Feith, very prominent intellectual. Not intellectual. In fact, General Tommy Franks called him the stupidest motherfucker on planet Earth. But, Mr. French, I learned a few things. I thought I knew a lot about 9/11, and I did, but I learned a lot more. And what I learned about included what's called the Halloween Massacre. Let's pull that element onto the stage.
Mm-hmm.
The Halloween Massacre, come on there, Halloween Massacre element. It was, there you see a young Rumsfeld, a young Dick Cheney.
Yeah.
Rumsfeld and Dick Cheney. Cheney was the youngest chief of staff ever. I think might still have that record. Mm-hmm. And in the corner, you see the New York Times, the good gray lady, the old gray lady, with the article about this shakeup. It happened on November 4th, 1975. And in a nutshell, it was the new guard that wanted to get rid of the Nixon holdovers now that Ford had assumed office. And it was quite a coup because 4 people overthrew 4 really powerful people. And we can go through it really quickly. Kissinger had held the National Security Advisor and Secretary of State post. Brent Scowcroft came in to take the National Security Advisor position.
Mm-hmm.
William Kobe was CIA director. He was replaced by George H.W. Bush. And he had only been a 2 or 3 term congressman at that point. And some of his colleagues said, "George, what do you know about intelligence?" Because above ground, nobody thought that he knew anything about it.
Yeah.
But if you look at the movie, Everything is a Rich Man's Trick. Every war is a rich man's trick.
He was clearly on site at the Kennedy assassination. His fingerprints are all over that.
He might have been the commander of the day for JFK.
That Absolutely. Put that whole crew together. Yeah.
Yeah, and his oil company, Zapata Oil, probably had its offshore drilling rigs in the Gulf of Mexico used by anti-Castro Cubans and the CIA in their perpetual attempts to overthrow Castro.
Mm-hmm.
And his dad was present at creation in World War I of American intelligence and was present at creation of the National Security Act in 1949, I believe. And Prescott Bush, George H.W. Bush's dad, was present at creation of American intelligence, present at creation of the national security state, and was one of the people that plucked Nixon, created Nixon as a stooge for the national security state.
And was deeply tied financially to funding the Nazis the entire time.
Yeah, through his investment bank, Brown Brothers Harriman.
Harriman, that's right.
Which is worth reminding ourselves about because the CIA doesn't exist to collect information for the executive branch. It exists to serve the interests of Wall Street.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why so many directors have come from Wall Street. And also in the Halloween Massacre, 74, James Schlesinger was replaced as chief of staff by Donald Rumsfeld.
Mm-hmm.
Rumsfeld became a very young Secretary of Defense.
Mm-hmm.
And his protege, Rumsfeld was the senior one now, his protege, Dick Cheney, moved up to chief of staff. So in just a few days, you have Scowcroft, National Security Advisor, Bush, CIA Director, Rumsfeld, Secretary of Defense, Cheney, Chief of Staff. That is an enormous, like a coup d'etat.
Well, and look at the timeline. I mean, these men end up trusting each other and staying linked. The rest of their entire careers, they piggyback off of each other in one way or another. They are a really tight crew that becomes inseparable for the rest of their careers.
That's why when I learned about the Halloween Massacre, I was, holy shit, these four? Because what were they in the George H.W. Bush administration? Bush obviously was president. Scowcroft was National Security Advisor again. Cheney was Defense Secretary for Gulf War 1.0. And Rumsfeld was out of government, but he was a consultant to either state or defense. So he was on the fringes, but in the mix. So, and then fast forward to George W. Bush's administration.
Yeah.
Cheney is vice president, probably running the show more or less.
Absolutely.
And let's see who else. Rumsfeld was obviously Rumsfeld was defense secretary, and Bush at that point was a power broker especially through the Carlyle Group, which got me interested. A private equity firm that has a strong presence in military contractors and also hires former heads of state as door openers and rainmakers for their deal flow. And when we get to motive, means, and opportunity. When we get to opportunity, we will examine the very interesting role that Scowcroft had on the day of 9/11.
Yeah.
But so that's the Halloween Massacre.
Mm-hmm.
And they had goals. And among them was to create more alarmist estimates of the Soviet Union's military capability.
Mm-hmm.
And this was against Kissinger's policy of détente with the Soviet Union, to find a way to live together with the Soviet Union. And to stoke the flames, they had, who'd they hire? The chair was Richard Pipes, another noted neocon, and he hired Paul Wolfowitz on the strength of Richard Pearl's recommendation. So at this time, Rumsfeld was a little senior to Cheney, but he pulled up Cheney with him. And Pearl was a little senior to Wolfowitz, but he pulled up Wolfowitz with him. So this group became called the B Team. And they were a Foreign Intelligence Advisory Board, and they made these alarmist estimates to derail arms control talks in the 70s. Now we can flash forward to the Reagan years. And I think Reagan was not particularly interested in the nuts and bolts of policy and governing. And so I think he left a lot of it, particularly the covert stuff, to George H.W. Bush.
Absolutely.
his vice president. And there was a lot of covert stuff that happened during the Reagan years.
Iran-Contra, and yeah, there was a lot.
October Surprise, where we
Mhm.
got spare parts via Israel to Iran in exchange for the hostages, which were released the day of Reagan's inauguration.
Hmm.
Iran-Contra, as you say, which was to bring coke from Central America to Freeway Ricky Ross, mostly to start the crack epidemic in the black community
In LA.
in
Yeah.
Compton and Long Beach and the rest of LA.
Right.
Not a conspiracy theory, documented fact.
Hmm.
And other scandals, the savings and loan scandal, which was a pure bust out, just hundreds of billions of dollars right into the black budget of the CIA intelligence. And I think George H.W. Bush was behind all that. So, yes, I see in my notes Rumsfeld we're now in the H.W. Bush's administration again. Rumsfeld was advisor to state. And H.W. Bush, Rumsfeld, Scowcroft, they're able to Cheney market themselves as realists, kind of in that Kissinger and Brzezinski mold.
Well, I think there's value too in hammering home the point. Your point about Reagan. You know, people in a cheeky, flippant way refer to him as a two-bit actor. But people don't remember Richard Nixon came about from literally answering an ad in a newspaper.
Yes.
Ronald Reagan was given to the American public as a political figure. He was bought and paid for by General Electric. That's what started his career. GE, Reagan coming through the Depression and being where he was from, Reagan in his younger years was staunchly an advocate of the working class and for working people. By any measure, he would have had what would be considered democratic leanings. Not that that means anything nowadays, but being bought by General Electric immediately changed his view toward the financial policy of big business by GE and being their spokesperson. So the country watching those long form, what would be considered now today to be an infomercial, gave Ronald Reagan this fake air of being pedantic and being trustworthy, selling General Electric products. And they sent him from coast to coast, doing talks about the policies that needed to happen that General Electric was in favor of.
That's correct. That gave him a national platform. That gave him a national prominence. And you're right to bring up his initial populist leanings. He is, after all, the only member of a union to ever be elected president.
Mm-hmm.
He was president of the Screen Actors Guild.
Yeah,
that was his first brush with public life. And one of my favorite, well, there's so many. One of my many favorite people from Saturday Night Live is Phil Hartman, and he has a bit where he does Reagan, and he pretends to be that kind of oafish guy in public, but then really got a lot of moxie in private. So it's something like, oh well, yeah, I don't think I know anything about that. Well, if you say so. And then the cameras are off. He's behind closed doors. All right, see, here's what we're going to do. Johnny Four Fingers, you're going to get the files. Rocco, I want you to ice Johnny Boy. And, like that. You never know.
Well,
You
there's
never
also
know.
that
Maybe he just
there's
put
that
on that.
yeah. Well, there's that classic shot of him literally being told to hurry up by the Merrill Lynch president right after his inauguration, ringing the bell. That was not the most shining moment. I think that was like one of the first times a president was caught on camera being told what to do by a banker. I don't know if the stream is still going, everyone. We seem to have lost voice momentarily. So maybe one of our classic uh, speed snafus, but I'm sure we'll get him back momentarily.
Look
And if I
who's
remember,
here!
yeah, that was fast. Good job.
Yeah. Uh, I don't know. Was he playing the folksy "I'm an idiot" act as an actor, or was he just, hey, now I got the position. I don't really care. That was the whole point. I don't know, but I think especially the covert stuff was probably left to Bush. But we are in the H.W. Bush administration now,
Mm-hmm.
and let's start to talk about defense policy,
Yeah.
which we do a lot in this show. And here's one we've referred to more than once, which is the Draft Defense Planning Guidance from Paul Wolfowitz during
Yeah.
1992 at the tail end of HW's administration, and it was too hot for them to
Mm-hmm.
release. There's the a New York Times clip. U.S. strategy plan calls for ensuring no rivals develop. Too hot. This is a long bit of text, but I think it warrants reading because it really,
Yeah.
it's 30 years old, but it still forms the bedrock of American strategic policy.
Mm-hmm.
So let's read it in full. Our first objective is to prevent the reemergence of a new rival, because this is the moment when the Soviet Union has just collapsed, broken up into the constituent Soviet socialist republics.
Yeah.
The largest one, the anchor one, Russia, is flatline and being just picked apart by the Chicago boy economics, the Chicago boys. And so our first quote from the Draft Defense Planning Guidance, 1992, Wolfowitz. Our first objective is to prevent the reemergence of a new rival. Still the way they're thinking.
Mm-hmm.
This is a dominant consideration underlying the new regional defense strategy and requires that we endeavor to prevent any hostile power from dominating a region whose resources would, under consolidated control, be sufficient to generate global power. There are 3 additional aspects to this objective. First, the United States must show the leadership necessary to establish and protect a new order that holds the promise of convincing potential competitors that they need not aspire to a greater role or pursue a more aggressive posture to protect their legitimate interests. Second, in the non-defense areas, we must account sufficiently for the interests of the advanced industrial nations to discourage them from challenging our leadership or seeking to overturn our established political and economic order. Finally, we must maintain the mechanisms for deterring potential competitors from even thinking or from even aspiring to a larger regional or global role. That is exactly what we're doing now.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's they set it in motion, and it's hard to unspin or slow down a hegemon, right? I mean, when that's your choice, especially being a country that's only 4% of the entire population of the planet Earth, to be that bold, to take that position, to say, hey, 96% of the rest of the planet, don't even think about it. This is our racket. You're going to do what we say, or we will bomb you. I mean, that's bold. That's aggressive. And the idea that the entire world should be ruled by that thinking, I think, it's appropriate to call it into question from time to time.
Yeah. Listen to what it said. We must account sufficiently for the interests of the advanced industrial nations to discourage them from challenging our leadership. Look at, by blowing up Nord Stream, America deindustrialized Germany, our closest ally in Europe.
With friends like us.
Well, that's exactly what Kissinger said at one point. To be America's enemy is dangerous. To be America's friend can be deadly.
Mm-hmm.
Sick puppies. And that planning guidance also said deter potential competitors from even aspiring to a larger regional or global role. I mean, Secretary of Defense Austin explicitly said in testimony before Congress that the point of the Ukraine war from the United States perspective was to bleed Russia. And what's his name? Utah, Romney. Senator Romney just said it a few days ago. It's only 3% of our defense budget, and it's bleeding the hell out of Russia, so it's great. So look at all of the scare, and then, of course, the incessant banging of the war drum for a war with China, which seems bipartisan. I think that the Republicans, they're not keen on the Ukraine war anymore, but it's not because they're peaceniks. It's because they want to focus on China. I think that's a bipartisan agenda. So look at what we're doing to Europe, our closest allies. It's in this document. Look at how we're trying to pin encircle China and bleed Russia. It's straight out of this 30-year-old document.
Mm-hmm.
But we could also look at another textbook for this crew from the quote-unquote Democratic side of Rockefeller's national.
Yeah.
The Democratic side of Rockefeller's empire. And you can find this if you Google it. This is on the CIA's website.
Of course.
A PDF of the Grand Chessboard is on the CIA's website. They see this as an instruction manual.
Yeah.
And I think because it has barbarians, I'm going to do it in an Arnie voice. To put it in a terminology that harkens back to a more brutal age of ancient empires. The three grand imperatives of imperial geostrategy are to prevent collusion and maintain security dependence among the vassals, to keep the tributaries pliant and protected, and to keep the barbarians from coming together.
Yeah.
And, also in that book, he said, it would be really terrible, really dangerous for American interests if, for some reason, that China and Russia and Iran were to come together by a sense of common grievances. Well, look at the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Look at BRICS. It happened. Just because America's imperial handlers think they're clever, but they're stupid even for their own objectives.
Well, they act like the rest of the planet Earth is not aware of Halfred Mackinder's work, you know? They're not stupid. There was such a thing as the Silk Road, and it happened a really long time ago. Like they know what it's like to trade. They know the cost of warring with each other. So the idea that they're going to let us continue to break them apart and create fake fights through Islamic terrorism or whatever the boogeyman of the day is, the idea that they're all going to let us get away with it in perpetuity, it's the most naive, ignorant, preposterous thing in the world. You can drive from Siberia to Cape Town. At what point aren't those people going to realize we are so bored of colonialism? We're bored with the middlemen of it. We're bored of the inflation of it. We're bored of not actually getting anything except some fake safety from problems that the West is creating. I mean, it was just so arrogant. What you're laying out, the bombastic nature of that language, to lay it out as a matter of national policy for everyone to see and then cram it down their throats. What do you think is going to happen? People are going to get sick of it and just say, enough is enough. Go back to your sandbox. You people are being just flatly antisocial and rude. This is ridiculous. We're going to go another direction. We have our eye on the future. We have a lot of people to feed. There's some legitimate things that have to be done, and your bombs aren't going to help us solve any of it.
Yeah, America has a hard time thinking beyond the Atlanticist tradition.
Mm.
Obama had the famous pivot to Asia, and your faithful correspondent Stonefruit is in the occupied kingdom of Hawaii, so we naturally look more towards Asia. But I don't think the New York to DC access does. So they blew up Nord Stream because they wanted to prevent German technology and capital from integrating with Russian labor and the resources. That's the Atlanticist project. The Atlanticist project is disintegrating. The war in Ukraine has made Europe more deeply vassal-like than they have ever been, to such an extent that Europe, which used to be the center of the world, quote unquote, is going to be an impoverished Western backwater of Eurasia.
Completely irrelevant. I mean, unless you're going there just to ride a bike and be a tourist, I mean, it's going to be completely irrelevant.
I have my eye on Eurovelo 6, Mr. French.
Yeah.
From Dijon to Vienna.
Hey, great place to walk and ride a bike and get some really good food and nice beer. I
will do that ride, and then I will also trek the HAUTE, high in French, the hot route from Chamonix, France to Zermatt, the Matterhorn in Switzerland. So, Europe will continue to exist for high-end goods and tourism, but it will be an impoverished Western backwater of Eurasia. Because going great guns, we have BRICS just gathered all these new members. Shanghai Cooperation Organization, led by China. Eurasian Economic Union, led by Russia. These guys are all working in tandem. One of our favorite analysts, Pepe Escobar, was just in Vladivostok, which was a summit on Eurasian integration. American policymakers in DC they wouldn't even understand the concept.
Mhm.
And it's all happening without them, and it's 80% of the world.
Well, I think, yeah, and that's what's so important about this piece specifically. We just went off on a sidebar, but I think it's important for people to see in your work, once these things all the way come together and they get married and attached to the people that are hell bent on executing it and seeing it through, how long these things can go on for. So in your work, this is basically the inception and birth of something like the Project for the New American Century, right?
which we'll get to in a second.
Well, so that's why I'm going to be quiet for a while, so we can be concise, because this actual piece on motive,
Yes.
all three of these are so important, but I don't want to distract you from what you're doing for everyone right now today.
Yeah, we can go galloping to Project for a New American Century in just a few minutes. I want to emphasize the ideological continuity. Okay, the neoconservatives are kind of the bad guys right around the 9/11 era, but we've
Mhm.
demonstrated how the great American oligarchs like David Rockefeller, they put money on both ponies. They got Brzezinski and Kissinger,
Mhm.
and the ideological continuity continues into the Clinton administration. Madeleine Albright, Secretary of State. I believe she was a Senator Ed Muskie staffer, and then I think she worked for Brzezinski at, at the National Security Council under Carter. So she was a woman breaking the glass ceiling of murder and mayhem.
Oh, mass murder. Yeah. Yay, feminism.
Hashtag girl boss.
Yeah.
But let's listen to what this lady said. In 1992, Albright asked Colin Powell, "What's the use of having this?" Who I think was chairman of Joint Chiefs of Staff at the time.
Yeah, that's
What
right.
What's the use of having this superb military you're always talking about if we can't use it?
Yeah.
And this one is really famous. In 1996, she was interviewed by Leslie Stahl, who said that the UN sanctions against Iraq had killed at least
Half a
500,000
million. Yeah. Mhm.
children,
Yeah.
not even people overall, children.
Mm.
And I'll quote Stahl and then I'll quote her response. "We have heard that 500,000 Iraqi children have died. I mean, that is more children than died in Hiroshima. And is the price worth it?" I think that it is a very hard choice, but we think the price is worth it. I
Yeah.
hope your trip through the Bardo realm was as disturbing as the events that you created in the material realm, Madeleine Albright.
Hmm.
While NPR was giving her girl boss obituaries when she passed a year or so away,
Right.
this kind of mentality of not caring about the wholesale slaughter and displacement of people and destruction of authoritarian but prosperous nations like Iraq, it has never left the Beltway establishment. So now we can start dipping into the neocons and how they evolved into the Project for a New American Century. So after the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991, you started to hear murmurs of a peace dividend. And other intellectual, I use intellectuals with air quotes,
Yeah.
other people that were in the neocon movement in the 90s, outside of the Clinton administration, they were, ho, 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 ho. Is you cooking? Peace dividend?
Yeah.
What you talking about, Willis?
Yeah.
they didn't want to do that. Not gonna do it. Not gonna. But in the 90s, the mid 90s, the neocons centered around the American Enterprise Institute, a big think tank that had been around since the 60s. And also Bill Kristol, Irving Kristol's son, his magazine, The Weekly Standard. And he founded that with Robert Kagan, who's married to the inimitable and delightful Victoria Nuland.
Right.
Acting Deputy of State now.
Mm-hmm.
And the Weekly Standard also featured personalities like Doug Feith. And they laid down a big marker in the establishment journal Foreign Policy. Bill Kristol and Robert Kagan wrote Towards the Neo-Reaganite Foreign Policy. This is July, August 1996. To my way of looking at it, that was the initial nucleus that evolved into the Project for a New American Century.
Mm-hmm.
And shortly after that, June 1997, they issued their Statement of Principles. Let's take a gander at some of the signers. Good old Elliott Abrams.
Yeah.
Darth Cheney. Zalmay Khalilzad, who we'll get to. He was a guy from a tribe in Afghanistan. He worked at the RAND Corporation for a number of years. He worked in the National Security Council as far back in the 70s. He was always the South Asian guy for the right-wing warmongers.
Mm-hmm.
And Scooter Libby, who was also a player in the B team, and no, not the B team, but the draft defense planning guide of 1992, who would later become Cheney's chief of staff. And I should say Khalilzad would later become Afghanistan ambassador, Iraq ambassador, UN ambassador. Also signatories were Rumsfeld, Wolfowitz. The gang's all here, Mark.
Mm-hmm.
And the thrust of their Statement of Principles was, quote, as the 20th century draws to a close, the United States stands as the world's preeminent power. Having led the West to victory in the Cold War, America faces an opportunity and a challenge. Now, the next most important document we need to look at from these guys is a letter to President Clinton on Iraq, January 1998. In that letter, they said that they were dedicated to, quote, removing Saddam Hussein and his regime from power as the aim of American foreign policy, and to end the threat of weapons of mass destruction of the United States or its allies. Now, that tells you that they had Iraq in their sights as early as 1998, January 1998. Let's look at who signed this letter. This is still Project for a New American Century. They're starting to get their wheels turning. Elliott Abrams, Richard Armitage, who would go to the State Department, John Bolton, who you can't get rid of either. He was Trump's national security advisor. End of history historian and theorist Francis Fukuyama. Mr. Victoria Nuland, Robert Kagan, Zalmay Khalilzad, William Kristol, the golden boy of neoconservatives at the beginning of the 70s, Richard Pearl, a.k.a. the Prince of Darkness, Donald Rumsfeld, Paul Wolfowitz, Robert Zolnick, who would later, of course, go on to be the head of the World Bank. So, mid to late 90s, second incarnation of the neocons, firmly ensconced now within the Republican Party. They're overlapped by another group of Republican hawks who are called the Vulcans. One reason that they might have been called this is because they were kind of led by Brent Scowcroft protege Condoleezza Rice, who's from Birmingham, Alabama, and apparently there is a statue of Vulcan in Birmingham. But this group, same people, again and again. The Vulcans included Armitage again, Wolfowitz protege Scooter Libby, Prince of Darkness Pearl, Wolfowitz himself, Dov Zakheim, controller of the Pentagon in 9/11, a central figure we'll get more to as this series progresses, and Baker protege Robert Zolnick. But just to show that this kind of these kind of ideas, they're not really neoconservative, they're not really Republican or Democrat. Let's pull up another image of Joint Vision. Joint Vision 2020 was issued in January 1st, 2020. There it is. Rise, oh visual, rise. But it was issued on January 1st, 2000. And it said that the overall goal of transformation described in this document is the creation of a force that is dominant across the full spectrum of military operations. This is the notion of full spectrum dominance that neocon, non-neocon, Kissinger, Brzezinski, Democrat, Republican, this bipartisan concept of full spectrum dominance was first officially enunciated in the Joint Vision 2020.
Yeah, more like full spectrum money washing.
Full spectrum money laundering.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it tried to account for how important digitization and the internet and modern telecommunications were for contemporary war fighting. And I get it. Makes sense. But it was also conveyed in that kind of moment of American peak unipolar hegemony from the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991, I believe, the 90 to 92 period, and into Gulf War 2.0. It was a unipolar world briefly.
Absolutely.
And
China had not quite been accepted to the WTO yet. They're still in their infancy as an industrial power and the labor of the world. All the collapse of the Soviet Union, that all those supply chains go away. Larry Summers really created the Russian oligarchy. Basically, he's the one that deindustrialized all those supply chains, financialized everything, gave it away to New York. They saw it as an opportunity to get that entire network to pull an 80s Japan and just double down on financialization and pick it clean, vulture style, of anything that was going to be left over. So I think you're bringing up such solid points of why they were salivating and how these documents started coming out of the think tanks so quickly.
Yeah, and let's translate it from the think tanks to official policy.
Sure.
Let's spend a little more time on Joint Vision 2020. It said that the future was America's to define with, quote, bold leadership supported by as much information as possible. Information being the key part of this new spectrum of full spectrum
Mhm.
dominance. But the photographs that illustrated it still had aircraft carriers, tanks, single-seat fighters, paratroopers exiting airplanes, marine amphibious vehicles landing. You know, what Andrew Bacevich called the tacit assurances that the individual services will keep doing what they have been accustomed to doing since World War II.
Mhm.
So, okay, Brave New World, new policy statements, but don't worry, services, you'll still do what you've always been doing. We know change is hard. So the main developments are the new telecommunications and information technology. But Bacevich notes that this document, just as is America's want, ignores, quote, history, politics, and culture. But it's now we see the bipartisan discussion becoming official policy. Now we're really deep into PNAC territory, Project for a New American Century territory. The final and most substantial document that they had was Rebuilding America's Defenses, September 20. Let's look at the signatories again. We got Robert Kagan, we got Bill Kristol, we got Louis Libby, we got Paul Wolfowitz, we got Dov Zakheim.
Mhm.
And here's a quote from it. The one constant of Pentagon force planning through the past decade has been the recognized need to retain sufficient combat forces to fight and win as rapidly and decisively as possible multiple, nearly simultaneous major theater wars.
Mhm.
That idea is still with us. We're using Ukraine as a proxy for a war with Russia, and America is gearing up for a war with China. The concept of fighting two major wars simultaneously is still with us. And because we want to emphasize the bipartisan nature, let's refer back to a document and another lovely lady, another hashtag girl boss,
Flournoy.
Michelle Flournoy, who many people thought would be Secretary of State or more likely Defense Secretary, Anthony Blinken's partner at West Exec Advisors. West Executive Avenue goes between the White House and the more office building part of the White House. And to cross from the office building to the Oval Office or the Situation Room is to cross West Exec. And that's where the name comes from. And she wrote in her Flournoy in the Clinton's 1997 Quadrennial Defense Review, same thing, quote, "We have determined that U.S. forces must be capable in fighting and winning two major theater wars simultaneously."
Mm-hmm.
Motive, new enemy. We haven't conjured the enemy yet, but both the Democrats and Republicans are saying, as soon as we do, we're going to be able to go after two wars at once.
That's right.
And another key element that the Rebuilding America's Defenses called for was, quote, "a revolution in military affairs." And this would be a new wave of procurement based on these kinds of advances in IT and telecoms. But it had the same themes that were constant to both Democratic and Republican administrations and people out of government. Like Chessboard was written by Brzezinski, Out of Government.
Mm-hmm.
Preemptive unilateralism. Preemptive unilateralism, maximizing America's unilateral hegemony to the utmost, and preventing the rise of any peer or even regional competitors.
Mm-hmm.
That's all totally bipartisan.
Yes, Monroe Doctrine for the entire planet.
For planet Earth.
Yeah.
Yeah, so here's a little line in Rebuilding America's Defense by Project for a New American Century that's drawn a lot of attention. It says, quote, "This process of transformation the revolution in revolution in military affairs. The process of transformation, even if it brings revolutionary change, is likely to be a long one, absent some catastrophic and catalyzing event like a new Pearl
Harbor. Yeah. They wrote that. Yeah.
And what did George W. Bush write in his diary the evening of 9/11?
Yeah, I'm not sure he just wrote it. Yeah.
We have just experienced a new Pearl
Harbor. Yeah.
Okay, so now we're on the day of, or within hours of the attack. It wasn't a plane, it was a missile. We'll get more into that during the means episode. But shortly after the Pentagon was hit by a missile, Rumsfeld was already crystallizing his strategy. And this is a declassified memo from Rumsfeld.
Yeah.
This is his aide taking notes. Best info fast. Judge whether good enough to hit Saddam Hussein. That letter from 1998 from PNAC. Judge whether good enough to hit Saddam Hussein at same time. Not only Osama bin Laden. Go massive. Sweep it all up. Things related and not. General Wesley Clark, who was not only a presidential candidate, but was the NATO commander of their pulverization of an alternative political and economic system found in Yugoslavia. At one point, Clark said, "I need maximum violence out of my campaign now." But, he's still in the upper echelons. And a few days after having met with Rumsfeld and Wolfowitz, Wesley Clark was called to the side by a top general that he had worked with in the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And this guy told Clark that America was going to invade Iraq without any connection to 9/11.
Yeah.
They'd already made that determination within days. And to invade 7 more countries. They were already fashioning this idea within days.
Yeah.
And I think this is an ideal time to bring in the Prince of Darkness again, who had a few pithy words to say. I mean, like psycho words. Really, like crazy. This slide's having a little time coming up. Rise, oh slide. Come on, come again. What he said was, this is total war. We are fighting a variety of enemies. There are lots of them out there.
Yeah.
All this talk about first we are going to do Afghanistan, then we will do Iraq. This is entirely the wrong way to go about it.
Yeah.
If we just let our vision of the world go forth and embrace it entirely, and we don't try to piece together clever diplomacy, but just wave total war.
Yeah.
Totaler Krieg, as Goebbels called it. Our children will sing great songs about us years from now. The guy's fucking mental.
Yeah, that's nuts. But I mean, but now that you've laid this out, it becomes obvious how this stays as a matter of philosophy, as a matter of language, as a matter of policy. They cannot let it go. The work that you've done on 9/11 has made it so clear the amount of Nazis that these people have been okay with, the Blitzkrieg Nazi policy and adopting two of the generals' military policy. I mean, the Nazis lost the fucking war. Why would you like they lost? Why would you adopt that? So,
Or
I
did
mean, the
they?
amount yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, that's kind of sick and weird, but over and over again you see this Nazification. It's completely exposed right now because of Ukraine, but the Nazification of so much military and finance policy, they made so much money and became so powerful during World War II because of the Nazi model and backing the Nazi model. It does not go away in the United States and Britain. It's been like just over and over and over again the rubber stamping of this kind of language and policy.
Yeah. Uh, you mentioned that Prescott Bush, through Brown Brothers Harriman Investment Bank, helped fund the Nazis. Alan Dulles, later CIA director, was in the OSS in Zurich,
Yeah.
funding
Henry Ford,
Henry Ford.
Exxon. I mean, it's.
Yeah. So you look at key players in the foreign policy establishment of America, and key American oligarchs have no problem at all creating the industrial base of Nazi Germany.
That's right.
And participating and profiting from it. So they fund and arm and provide an industrial base for both sides.
Yeah.
It's just money making for them.
Mm-hmm.
And if people will watch Everything is a Rich Man's Trick, that filmmaker posits a compelling theory. This idea of funding both sides is not a new one. The Rothschilds,
No, of course not. Yeah.
yeah, the Rothschilds gained their fortune by funding both sides of the Napoleonic Wars.
Mm-hmm.
And when they had attained some prominence as a financial family, their patriarch set up each of his kids in different cities in Europe that were financial centers. One in London, one in Paris, one in Frankfurt, one in Vienna.
Mm-hmm.
I might have missed one. But the filmmaker from Everything is a Rich Man's Trick posits the idea that Hitler may have been a bastard of the Vienna branch of the Rothschilds.
Yeah, of course.
So he's kind of in the family anyway.
Yeah.
And manipulable and controllable. And I've even seen theories that Winston Rockefeller was governor of Arkansas. You know who looks a lot like Winston Rockefeller? The man from Hope, Arkansas.
Yeah, Bill Clinton. Yeah.
One
Yeah.
William Jefferson Clinton looks an awful lot like Winston Rockefeller.
Yeah.
So that's more speculative outside of the scope of this podcast. But
well, the other fun thing about your work that really, because the area that I've paid attention to the most and have worked in the most is really the economic side. I mean, as an empath, yes, human suffering sucks, mass murder sucks. All these things are bad. But at the end of the day, to me, economics really are a literal meat and potatoes situation of, can people eat and feed their kids and send them to school? So the what you've laid out and the people that come out of the Prescott Bush crew, right? Because they don't go away. Those, for the public to understand more clearly, it's not any different than like a football coaching tree. If you're into sports, there's these people come from somewhere. They come from a well-defined school of thought. They have a lot of personal crossover. They met each other at university. They spent time together in a think tank. They were, on the Council of Foreign Relations. So it's on and on and on. These people come from a very specific view and school of thought. They had an idea laid out for their career and how they were going to advance and how they wanted to be seen and the money that they wanted to make, the power that they wanted to seize. These kind of things happen over and over again. So I say all that to say World War II was the first time that a European engagement, that the debts weren't written off at the end of it. And that was at the complete control and behest of the United States. People were actually shocked and considered it extremely rude that the United States wanted its money back in blood and treasure. When that ended, that had never previously been the case.
Well, they gave a lot of lend-lease to allies like the British Empire and Soviet Union. They forgave the Soviet Unions, but they did not forgive the United Kingdom's debt. And to the best of my knowledge, they only finished paying that off within the last 10 or 20 years.
Yeah.
So they intentionally used the debt to kill off the last remaining life of the British Empire.
That's right.
And if you were really cynical, they waived the debt for the Soviet Union so that they would have an able new enemy, which was motive number one of this podcast.
We'll get them later when they actually have something. Yeah.
Creating a new enemy.
Yeah.
And now we're about to dip into pipeline politics, but it all revolves back exactly to what you said. Money.
Yeah.
And through financial institutions and funding and earning profits from both sides. And one last little point before we dip into pipeline politics as a motive. If we talk about, did the Nazis really lose or not? We have to examine Operation Paperclip.
Yeah.
Where they brought in thousands of Nazi scientists and doctors, rocketry, space program, in a lot of fields. We brought over the top Nazis into America. A lot of the top Nazis remain in place under the leadership of Richard Gehlen, who was a high-ranking intelligence official of Nazi Germany, and he was allowed to keep his entire network and allowed it to even grow as a means of counteracting the Soviet Union.
Well, and to your point, 25% of American GDP is already the healthcare system. So you get into pharmaceuticals like Boehringer Ingelheim and Lilly, and so those Nazis don't go away. You're talking about Bayer buying Monsanto. Does anybody think it's a coincidence the company that provides supposed medicine for chemotherapy and cancer bought the company that is causing cancer. I mean, Boehringer Ingelheim provided the ingredient for Agent Orange. I mean, it's not, and these people are going to give you medicine. I mean, it's just so, yeah, the tentacles are everywhere, man.
I want my pharmaceuticals from the company that created Zyklon B, which was used to gas all the Jews in the Holocaust. IG Farben.
Jesus. Yeah, right.
Yeah, so it's all about money. I mean, creating a new enemy. We're about to get into pipeline politics. It's just for money. It's all it is. And it's just to create theater for the public to get that money.
Yeah.
So now we can get into, as you mentioned, Halford Mackinder, the great geopolitician or geostrategist, geographer, who said he who controls the world island of Eurasia can control the world. And pipeline politics. Another major motive was the pipeline politics that helped American-based energy, the internationals, they're called, the big international oil companies, particularly the oil ones. And it was to extricate and bring to market all of the oil and gas that was in the Caspian Basin. Now we need to look at the influence of the oil industry in the Bush family and the George W. Bush administration to see why pipeline politics is so important as a motive for 9/11.
Yeah.
There is a mythos that George H.W. Bush drove his young family with Bush, his youngest, as a toddler, and Barbara drove a red Studebaker from New England to Texas to Midland, Odessa. But he probably actually rode on the airplane of the oil services company Dresser to the Permian Basin in West Texas, a huge oil field where H.W. Bush founded Zapata Oil and attempted to reconcile what has been called the Yankee and the Cowboy factions of the elite. And you mentioned, what are the elite? Do they decide everything in a star chamber? No, not necessarily, but they went to the same schools. They have a similar institutional position. They have a similar outlook on life. They know where the money is and how to get it. If you go through certain ritualistic behaviors, that's the elite. That's how they coordinate themselves.
The other really cool thing that you just said was the reconciliation of the Yankee and Cowboy faction, which was a very real thing during the Kennedy murder. The New England crew, the New York crew was completely at odds, and that had a great deal of friction from the turn of the century through industrialization until what you're talking about. That was a very real split in the two piles of money, political thinking. The Cowboys were not into the East Coast, Northeast snobbery. They had a vision for themselves, the oil men specifically, the creators of the banana republics, the ranchers, they had a very real split with the financialization and banking and tech sector. That was a very real thing for decades.
Yeah, the best book on this is The Yankee and Cowboy Wars by Carl Oglesby. And you're right. It's a Venn diagram. They have overlap, but they have a different orientation towards life and different economic basis of power. And, at this point, shortly after World War II, George H.W. Bush is in his early 20s, mid-20s. What does he know? I think
Right.
it was probably his dad saying, "You're the man to unite the Yankee and the Cowboy factions."
Get out there and figure this out. Yeah.
Because we've already got New England. We've got our place in New England. You go
It's
out
locked
to,
up forever and ever. Yep.
yeah, we got New England fine. Now you go out and colonize Texas for our family and our allies.
Yeah.
That's my theory. And
Yeah.
H.W. Bush's entire career has been the confluence of intelligence and politics with the geopolitics and macroeconomics of oil
Hmm.
since World War II.
Yeah.
And then George W. Bush is more thoroughly identified with Texas only, even though, he went to Yale, he's skull and bones. He's definitely New England. The family still
Right.
has the Kennebunkport, Maine home.
Hmm.
But Bush tried his hand at oil too. He had Arbusto and Harkin, and those both had substantial funding from a certain Saudi family,
Yeah.
the Bin Ladens.
Yeah.
So H.W. Bush plants the fat flag for the family shortly after World War II. Then he kind of makes Houston his base. And I think initially he ran for Congress in Midland, Odessa. So he's trying to get more towards the oil.
That's right. Yeah.
And he had Arbusto and Harkin with money from those Bin Ladens. So this is a family that has been involved in oil for decades. And he was elected in 2000, just floating on oil money. And when his administration came to power, his vice president, Cheney, had been CEO of Halliburton. And Halliburton actually bought Dresser Oil Services, who provided the plane that I think brought George H.W. Bush's family to Texas shortly after World War II, bringing it all full circle. And shortly, as soon as the George W. Bush administration came to power, Cheney chairs his National Energy Policy Development Group within 2 weeks. And some other oil connections: Condoleezza Rice, first National Security Advisor, then Secretary of State. She had been a board member of Chevron. She had been chair of their Public Policy Committee, which I would take to mean she was their lobbyist. And there was a 129,000-ton tanker named after her. A tanker named the Condoleezza Rice. Zalmay Khalilzad, back to him, Brzezinski protege, in and out of think tanks, including Rand Corporation from the Carter administration on. He was a consultant to Unocal in the late 1990s, which was America's favorite oil company, to build a pipeline from Turkmenistan to the sea, through Afghanistan to the sea. Now, the National Energy Plan that was released by Cheney's group up to that point made 3 key points. And those 3 points are, pull this up here, that the United States must satisfy an ever increasing share of its oil demand with imported supplies, and that it will also have to obtain substantial supplies from new sources, such as the Caspian states, and cannot rely on market forces alone to gain access to these added supplies, but will also require a significant effort on the part of government officials to overcome foreign resistance to the outward reach of American energy companies. That is a pretty naked declaration of their objectives. So within 2 weeks of taking office, Cheney assembles his energy committee. I don't think any of its proceedings have ever been made public beyond this type of summary. But this summary enough is extremely naked in saying that America just can't buy it off of the spot market worldwide. It needs to control the sources. So we've got Bush himself, Cheney, Condoleezza Rice, so much influence of the oil majors in the Bush 43 administration.
Mm-hmm.
And that is what many people cited as blocking any investigation into the Taliban. As it negotiated with the Taliban for the handover of Osama bin Laden after 9/11, because the Taliban had already blown up the Kenyan embassy, or the Al-Qaeda, allegedly. Mm-hmm. 2 embassies in East Africa, I think Tanzania and Kenya. So they're already trying to market Osama bin Laden as a significant leader of international terrorism. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. Mark, even at my middle age, I'm starting to still have new ideas. I'm thinking that things like international terrorism might be akin to domestic, well, they're called domestic terrorists now. Well, like the Whitmer, the so-called attempted assassination of Christine Whitmer, Michigan, right?
Gretchen. Yeah, Gretchen Whitmer.
Gretchen Whitmer.
Well, and that was clearly an FBI. That wouldn't have happened without the FBI. That was entrapment from the word go. Yeah,
11 or 12 of the co-conspirators were all FBI informants or FBI operatives.
It was ridiculous.
And I'm starting to think that they might just do that overseas.
Yeah,
where they have so many operatives and so many informants in there that you can't tell the difference between what they are creating and what is created organically as actual quote unquote terrorism.
Of course.
And
Syria. Yeah, Syria. Yeah, I mean, it's if you need a black and white example to see that clearly, I mean, all you have to do is pay attention to Syria for more than 30 seconds.
And it's a few I think that it's possible that some of the low-level informants and operatives, they don't give a shit about them. They can use them when they need a body to do something, and then just kill them.
Oh, they don't. Yeah, they don't care. Yeah,
because most of the
send them to jail. no one's gonna believe them.
Because most of the alleged hijackers were identity theft. So there's only a few actual quote unquote hijackers.
Sure.
And, one might have been Atta. So there are a few people that were possibly alive and participating in some way, not as architects, not as instigators, but as pawns that then could,
just grifters,
pawns upon which the blame could be laid.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That's my working theory. But back to the pipeline politics of the early Bush 43 administration in the early aughts. So with the fall of the Soviet Union and the transformation of the former Soviet socialist republics into nation states, it was like a field day. You've got Chevron, ExxonMobil, BP Amoco, Royal Dutch Shell, Norway's Statoil, France's Ulf Aquitaine, Italy's Agip, Russia's Lukoil, and China National Petroleum Corporation. Now, I have posted this pipeline map to demonstrate the pipelines that they were after.
Sure.
The initial exploration was off of Kazakhstan in the northern Caspian Sea. But this pipeline, it went through Kazakhstan and through Russia. Now, the United States wanted control over its own new pipelines. So the second major area of development in the Caspian Sea for oil and gas was around Azerbaijan. And they wanted a new pipeline, initially a short one, just to a Georgia port in the Black Sea. But to get through the Straits of Bosphorus, you have to have a smaller vessel than the largest oil tankers.
Sure.
So they also wanted to create a new pipeline called the Baku-Tbilisi-Ceyhan. Tbilisi is Georgia, capital of Georgia, not their port. So go from Baku, Azerbaijan, to Baku, to Tbilisi, Georgia, then to the Mediterranean port of Ceyhan in Turkey. That wasn't built during 9/11, but it was, James Baker and all these honchos were already in the Azerbaijan Chamber of Commerce and all that.
Yeah, right. Yeah, funny how that happens.
Yeah. So they wanted to reduce Georgia and Azerbaijan's reliance on Russia and bring the Southern Caucasus into the U.S. fold, which is still in the news this week with all the goings on in Azerbaijan and Georgia. And guess who was named a finalist to build that, to build the Turkish part of that pipeline route? Halliburton.
Yeah.
So
the Cheney crew.
They're all scratching each other's backs. But that was a long route, So what are some other possible routes? We go through Iran. Well, America shot itself in its own foot there, so they couldn't go through Iran. All right, well,
thanks to Kermit Roosevelt.
Sweet.
Right.
Yeah, Kermit. You want to do a freestyle on Mossadegh and Kermit?
No, keep going. This is too important.
Yeah, of course. America, CIA, Kermit Roosevelt overthrew Mossadegh because he wanted to nationalize the oil. Not a fire-breathing socialist. There is a thing called blowback. It has repercussions like the Iranian Revolution. They're still in power. So you can't build your pipeline.
Rest in peace, Chalmers.
Rest in peace, Chalmers. Rest in power. Great. Oh, great one. Yes, so great one. So we can't go through Iran. Where else can we go south? How about Afghanistan? How about we go through the graveyard of empires?
Yeah.
Oh, the place that's defeated the British Empire and Soviet Union. Why don't we go through that place of unimaginable complexity to the Western mind? How about Afghanistan?
Wow.
So by December 1995, the Taliban had controlled most of Afghanistan. So we have these pipelines. One's the one through Kazakhstan, through Russia, already in operation. The one from Baku to Tbilisi built. The one to Tbilisi to Ceyhan in process. Now we got to get through Afghanistan. So they're following the doings of the Taliban very closely in Afghanistan, of course. And by December 1995, they have seized control of most of Afghanistan, and Unocal was our leading company. But Pakistan was always in the mix. Their foreign secretary met with the Taliban that month to discuss the pipeline. Bin Laden declared jihad against the United States from Afghanistan. A Taliban delegation visited Washington, D.C. in February 1997.
The Taliban's also repeatedly been invited to a Houston suburb called the Woodlands during multiple energy regimes.
Want to stay on their good side, and they wanted
Mhm.
Taliban wants official recognition and to meet with Unocal, and Unocal wants to close the deal.
That's right.
Back to SNL again, since I love doing impersonations. They had a character doing Jesse Jackson. So I received a phone call and I hit star 69 and it was the Taliban. So the deal flow is moving up. Summer 1997, Unocal formed a new organization to facilitate the Turkmenistan-U.S. cooperation. They were given until December 1998 to begin construction. Unocal Vice President John Maresca, who later became ambassador to Afghanistan. How about that? Maresca testified on February 2, 1998, before the U.S. House that the Afghan pipeline route could not be built until, quote, a single, unified, and friendly government was in place. A month later, they announced their project. They announced that their project was suspended. Too much instability, can't get financing. Clinton's still in office. So they're trying to finagle it through Iran. This brings Shell into the game. The majors are ready. People are placing their bets. The Taliban are capricious and keeping everyone on their back foot. They announced that suddenly they're leaning towards Argentinian independent oil company, Bridas, to build the pipeline. And for muscle, Bridas partners with Amoco, one of the international majors. But Unocal, Delta, Japan's Itochi Oil, Indonesia Petroleum, Crescent Group, and Hyundai all become partners in Central Asian gas. This is starting to be a big, important thing for everybody. And so Unocal, they refused to give up. And they hosted the Taliban at their corporate headquarters in Sugarland. That might have been the Woodlands thing you're talking about.
Yeah, right. Sugarland. That's right. Yeah.
My computer's heating up. Let's see if I give it this perch, it cools off a little.
Okay.
Okay, yeah. So they're in Sugarland, the Woodlands, wherever, suburban Houston. It's all drive through. It's just driving anyway.
It looks the same. It's not. It doesn't surprise me that I would confuse those two.
Yeah. So that's Unocal's there, and late 1998, they withdrew from the Afghani and 2.9 billion Turkmenistan to Turkey natural gas project, and evacuated staff from the Taliban or from the region. Taliban visited the State Department. No deal was struck. Gazprom, Russian, they're moving into the consortium in February 1999. And Bridas is still trying to negotiate with Russia, Turkmenistan, and Kazakhstan. Shortly after, Turkmenistan's foreign minister meets with Taliban's Mullah Omar to discuss the proposed pipeline. Enron, the smartest men in the room, as the documentary about them says.
Enron and WorldCom end up having pretty critical role in the disappearance of Building 7, amongst
Yes, they did.
others.
Why don't you say a few words about that, and I'll get a book to cool off this computer.
Oh, okay, got it. Yeah, sure. So the timing of the collapse of those buildings really matters. And especially the building that fell that did not get hit by an airplane. So there was a run up. There was some really hot money and hot stocks going on in the tech industry. Enron was a minor outlier because it was supposedly energy. But the way that they were financialized and the way that that corporate structure was created, that thing was a hot potato from the word go. So that was, Enron was a money washing operation. They got the government to put a bunch of laws in place to create fake competition amongst third-party dealers of things. So it was basically the simplest way to boil it down for the average Joe or the general populace is to say the last mile delivery kind of system. That became a thing for energy and phone companies. So even though the monopolized providers were exactly the same, there became a fake explosion of service providers that were your actual retail company. So Enron kind of pioneered that in the energy industry. Always hot money coming out of Texas, right? Like the Wildcatter stuff. The laws are real fast and loose here, just like Delaware for banking. That's Texas for finance products and energy. They do the same kind of thing. So that led to some real hot money getting pumped through New York in the lead up to that building dropping.
Yeah, we started this podcast on World Trade Center 7.
That's right.
Among the tenets of that, and we'll get more deeply into this in means portion of the podcast series, but among the tenets of World Trade Center 7 were all these companies that had just crashed: Enron, WorldCom, Global Crossing, government entities, the largest CIA outfit outside of DC, Secret Service, a number of the other alphabet soup agencies. So part of the side benefit.
Well, and I don't want to make it too small. The entire information that led to the .com bubble crash was in that building. It wasn't just a few companies. The entire .com bubble burst. All of that information was in that building, in addition to all of the agencies that you're citing.
So that in itself is another motive, since this is the motive piece. It's to get rid of all the evidence.
That's right.
Well, Enron was interested in all the pipeline politics because they had sunk $3 billion into trying to make an electrical generating plant in Dabhol, India, but they lost their liquefied natural gas supplies from Qatar. So they wanted some gas from these pipelines. So now they're in the mix. April 1999, Turkmenistan, Pakistan, and Taliban, it was the Taliban, agreed to resurrect the project. On again, off again, more players. Some are dropping in, some are dropping out. The other pipelines are still going. That same month, the Baku to Supsa, the Georgian port pipeline, opened, 1999, bringing potential reserves of 32 billion barrels of oil.
Wow.
35 trillion cubic feet of natural gas, making it the third largest potential regional, this is just regional, source after Turkmenistan and Kazakhstan. So, mid 1999, the only pipelines in operation are the Russian one and the Azerbaijan to Georgia one. They're too small. You can't get the big tankers in there. Baku to Ceyhan, Turkey, still in the planning stages. Here's a pithy quote, Mark. In the ongoing negotiations with the Taliban, a U.S. representative said, either you accept our offer of a carpet of gold or we bury you under a carpet of bums.
Yeah. Shocking surprise.
I'm as shocked as you are.
Like carrot or stick.
That Casablanca scene. I'm shocked to see gambling. Shocked.
Yeah. Yeah.
Here's your pay packet for the week, Sergeant. Thank you.
It's I mean, the other classic one is the Godfather one, right? Make him an offer he can't refuse. I mean, that's.
I'm gonna make him an offer I can't refuse.
I mean, the mafiosi stuff from your work is just over and over and over and over. Like this is a thing with this crew. It really is.
Wall Street operates by a lot of similar moral codes and tactical means as the mafia. Yeah. I mean, like protection money.
Well, I mean, when Mussolini busts up the Sicilian crews, a lot of them end up over here. So like when you have the Nazi crews, you have the Sicilian crews, and then when you mix in the Jew crews, I mean, over and over again, these squads have been doing this for thousands of years, and then they all start coming here en masse during the World War II bust up, and you start to see this with Dove. And like once these guys get all the way ingrained and become prominent, you start to see these rackets over and over and over and over everywhere. They just start busting out everywhere.
Yeah, and the role of the Zionists cannot be overstated, and we'll be getting more into that in the means portion of our series. But now we are on to our next motive,
the
police state.
Yeah.
See, at the end of the day, it's all about money from both sides. That's creating a new enemy. That's pipeline politics. But what so-called democratic government wants most of all is to ever-enlarging suite of police state laws, an ever-enlarging suite of police state technology, mechanisms, means. It's just built into it as its type of bureaucracy whose goal is to maintain the trappings of democracy as a functional brand name so that people will stay asleep and think their civic participation is limited to voting only, while they just make money from both sides and continue their enlarging their suite of laws and technologies of control.
Well, I think it's such an important point what you just said to hammer it home. American counter-cyclical spending in modern times is always spent on hard power. Period, full stop. It's always military and cops. They will create any boogeyman necessary to sink money into hard power.
Yeah, and incarceration, the carceral
That's
state.
Right.
So the Patriot Act, or the long name is the United and the United and Strengthening America by providing appropriate tools required to intercept and obstruct terrorism act of 2001, better known as the Patriot Act. That was passed in direct response to 9/11. We're getting a little outside of 9/11 because we're focusing on the day, but the motive is to further enhance the police state. And if we were to go into some detail, we can do a very quick sidebar. Senator Tom Daschle was the Senate Majority Leader at the time, and Senator Patrick Leahy was the Judiciary Committee Chairman. And they were, because the Patriot Act was like 1,000 pages or however long. It was at least hundreds. It was extremely long, extremely complicated.
There's no way they could have wrote it and passed it that fast. It was already in the pipeline.
Absolutely. Mark French, your faithful and humble correspondent, Stonefruit, I have written education law for 6 sessions.
Yeah, if anyone knows, it's you.
I have written education law for 6 sessions 5 miles away at the Hawaii State Capitol.
Yeah.
And I wrote what was the most complicated reform bill of the aughts. And it was about 20 pages. But that took me meeting with, the Department of Education, the chairs of the Senate, the chairs of the House, and all the representatives of about 7 or 8 stakeholder groups, as I was directed to by the chairs of the Senate and the House education committees.
Yeah.
So for me, as a drafter, to write even a 20-page bill that has a lot of moving parts, that has a lot of sections, that has a lot of stakeholders whose input is to be valued, it took time, and it was a complicated process. This was infinitely longer, infinitely more complex, infinitely more draconian.
Sweeping, absolutely.
Infinitely more draconian in ushering in a police state. So I know as a legislative drafting professional, there's no fucking way that they wrote that in 2 weeks right after 9/11.
There's zero. It was already in the pipeline. They were just waiting for the thing.
They had certain laws that they, on their wish list of what they wanted to amend.
That's right.
They had certain new laws that they wanted to initiate.
That's right.
I believe that they drafted them all up and just were waiting for the opportune moment to throw it at Congress.
It's so cool what you're doing right now, because it's so blatantly obvious when you bring this forward. When you get through your 9/11 pieces, I think it makes it more clear for people how the First Amendment, the Fourth Amendment, the Fifth Amendment, on and on and on. Some of our most valued rights that we have as human beings that are just randomly lucky enough to be born here have been attacked for such a long period of time, and they're really stomping their foot on the gas. It's not going the other way. There's not more freedom coming. Like their answer to what they've done and the boiling pustules that are popping up because of it, their answer is to double down. It's not going the other way. So I think you laying out this work in this way is going to help people understand more clearly the function of what's happening elsewhere. I really do.
And the Patriot Act at that time was, and I see in my notes, it's 132 pages.
Okay.
At stonefruit.substack.com.
Yeah, go.
Which is still 132 pages is long enough. And a lot of it did, I believe, amend other laws. So they had to know where it fit into a bunch of other laws and to write new law. That's hard. That takes time.
Mhm.
I mean, even if you had 20 people and a lead person bringing all the pieces of 20 people
Sure.
drafting, it would
Yeah.
you still couldn't do it.
Months, years. Yeah. No.
You still
Yeah.
couldn't do it that fast.
Mhm.
But Daschle as leader and Leahy as judiciary chair, they
Mhm.
were hesitant. So then that's why they had to do the anthrax attacks. But that's anthrax attacks, maybe a different episode. Let's focus on the
Sure.
Patriot Act.
Yeah.
So the national security state has always had an appetite for control. And the COINTELPRO program, the FBI's counterintelligence program that surveilled, infiltrated, assassinated, and attempted to discredit many of the 60s, in particular, leading domestic civil rights and political leaders in the 60s and 70s. Once those revelations came to light in the Church Committee, the Senate Church Committee of 75 and 76, it was scandalous, and it created such alleged oversight bodies as the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act Court in 1978, quote unquote, to provide oversight and prevent abuse of surveillance. But no one knows who's on the FISA court. And in the first 35 years, a court, a public court. The
Right.
definition of probable cause is unknown. There's no party to argue against surveillance requests. And in the first 35 years of the FISA court's existence, out of 35,435 requests for FISA warrants, only 12
That's
were
insane.
rejected.
I mean, yeah, right.
So that's the big reform brought about by the Church Committee.
Yeah.
And so some of the laws I think that they probably already had in their crosshairs were the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act of 1978, that very act, the
Right.
Electronic Communication Privacy Act of 1986, the Money Laundering and Control Act of 1986, the Bank Secrecy Act, the Immigration and Nationality Act,
Right.
and the Omnibus Crime Control and Safe Streets Act of 1968.
Yeah.
And Biden and Clinton's crime bill of 1994.
Right. Basically, you're not allowed to wash money without their knowledge. They want to know where it's coming from. They want to know who you are. They got to get their cut. They have to sanction it, or you're
Not
done.
because they don't like it, because they don't like competitors.
Yeah, they don't know. It's a monopolization. Yeah, that's exactly right. It is a monopolization of black market money and information. They have to be the all-seeing eye. You're not allowed to do it. You're not allowed to participate without getting rubber stamped by them. I think that's exactly right. This starts, it's over and over and over. Once you know the crews and who these people are and the way that they think, your work lays this out for people in such an important way right now, because they're stomping their foot on the gas of it. They're not going to make it go away. Like, this is just what the deal is. John McCain, when he was still alive, used to make fun of Russia for being a gas pump masquerading as a country. It's become blatantly obvious this is a mafia crew squeezing you masquerading as a country. That's really what that's the there. This is happening over and over and over. It's not that complicated.
Yeah. The concern for the working and middle class, for the voter, for the citizen that was present in FDR's New Deal or LBJ's Great Society is gone.
Yeah, there's none of that.
And it's never coming back.
Yeah.
Unless it is a function that can be recycled at some point into campaign donations, they don't give a fuck about doing it.
No.
But they're making the military industrial complex very rich with the Ukraine war, and it's being recycled then into campaign donations, which is why they keep doing it.
Mm-hmm.
So while the government now serves the 0.01% and the 0.99% are their technocrats,
Yeah.
that's who government exists to serve, not the people.
Right.
And so since the people at some point are going to wise up to this and get a little cranky, that's why we need to have these police, that's why we need to have these police state laws like the Patriot Act.
Mm-hmm.
But there were other initiatives immediately after 9/11 too.
Yeah.
The president's surveillance program was a collection of surveillance programs. And one of the important one was total information awareness, which was a mass surveillance program that operated from February to May 2003 before being renamed terrorism information awareness, because total just sounded too, I don't know, what's the word? Totalitarian? So, although concerns spurred on by negative media reports led Congress to defund it in late 2003, the National Security Agency resumed most of the essential functions under the code name Basketball. There were a number of other secret National Security Agency signal intercept programs as well, with code names. Now, the director chosen for total information awareness, terrorism information awareness, was none other than convicted Iran-Contra criminal Admiral Poindexter. Now we can jump to a 2006 Supreme Court case, Hamdan versus Rumsfeld, in which the court, quote, rejected the president's creation of military commissions by executive order, upheld the right of detainees held by the U.S. at Gitmo to challenge their detention in the U.S. federal courts, and held that the protection of Geneva Convention applied to the war in Afghanistan.
Yeah.
Well, clearly that's not helpful. So the Military Commissions Act was passed the next year in 2007. That law gave the Defense Secretary almost unrestricted authority to declare people unlawful enemy combatants.
Yeah.
It granted U.S. officials immunity for their illegal actions, including torture. And who's the only guy that's ever gone to prison for the torture program? John Kiriakou, who's a fabulous guy to listen to on YouTube, veteran CIA operative. Just because he admitted that it happened, he was never forgiven and had to do 2 years. And he took a plea because he was being tried in Western Maryland, court of Western Maryland. Maybe it's Eastern
That's
Maryland.
right.
But it's the court. It's the suburbs where all the McMansion from all the military industrial complex and all the NSA and CIA people live. So that's the jury pool are all spooks. So he said, I'll take a 2-year plea.
Right.
He's the only guy that ever did time for torture. But they get immunity in this law.
Mhm.
Those awaiting such determination, it protects the U.S. government and U.S. officials from accountability for their actions against detainees, blocks the application of the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, civil rights laws, or the Alien Tort Statute, narrows the definition of torture, to allow U.S. officials to legally engage in practices that amount to torture, allows the use of statements obtained through coercion in prosecution, authorize military trials that provide little protection for the accused, and permit secret evidence, narrows the definition of sexual assault to allow for sexualized abuse in interrogation and
Right.
detention, and limits the use of international law in U.S. courts.
Well, it's so important you're bringing this stuff up too, because this is what gets this is what creates all the Susan Rices and Samantha Powers and the R2P, the right to protect. This is basically the groundwork for hijacking the UN Security Council to do whatever the hell they want to do anywhere.
Yeah, and big point being is that the law exists for people that America is fighting with abroad and detaining in Guantanamo Bay, but it provides the legal foundation of what they will eventually apply to American citizens,
That's right.
I believe.
No, it's they've adopted the Roman model. The powers that exist abroad always make their way home.
Exactly.
What they're doing abroad is just the guinea pig hamster wheel. That's just the test market. That's just
They're beta testing.
yeah, they're beta testing. That's exactly right.
Since this is the period of the podcast where we're naming the laws, in addition to our 5 regular viewers, I would like to be the first to welcome the National Security Agency.
Yeah, thank you.
Hey, yeah.
Screen mirroring. Hi,
Fuck
guys.
you.
Hope you're doing good.
Yeah, go fuck yourself. I hope you catch anal herpes. All right. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, besides it being beta testing for something that is going to come back to be used on American citizens, you know what else it does? Throws out 800 years of Anglo-American jurisprudence going back to the Magna Carta.
Yeah.
I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I have my issues with the American Empire,
Sure.
but some of Anglo-American jurisprudence going back as far as the Magna Carta has some good stuff.
Yeah.
Like, what's a biggie? Habeas corpus.
Yeah.
Latin for present the body, which means you present the body in court. You have your day in court.
That's right.
Habeas corpus, it allows people arrested or imprisoned to challenge the illegality of their arrest or detention in court.
Mm-hmm.
This is 800 years old, Mark French.
Yeah.
It's gone.
It's gone. Yeah, it's gone.
We've not only lost New Deal, Great Society, social spending. That's gone.
Right.
Never coming back.
Yeah. Never coming
We've
back.
lost 800-year-old legal principles that are actually worth a fuck.
Yeah. It's scary, dude. It's weird.
And they're not coming back either.
Nope.
So, broad sections of the much vaunted Bill of Rights and Constitution
Mm-hmm.
are dead letters.
Yeah.
And that was part of the motivation of 9/11 to create
Mm-hmm.
the police state.
Yeah.
To further create it. And it hasn't stopped accelerating since then.
No.
now we're galloping towards the end. We can go to the next idea, the next motive.
Yeah. Who
Which
admits
was
to losing that much money? Like, just Rumsfeld just said it casually, like $1 trillion. We can't find it. Like, we don't. The Pentagon has been fake attempted to be audited a couple of times the last 20 years. And the accounting firms just gave up. They were just like, we can't. This is not a serious way. This is not a serious way to account anything. Like, there's some
it can't
very
be audited.
serious stuff. It cannot be audited. And everyone's just like, yeah, cool, okay. Inflict austerity upon us because of our fake debt, because of this, the majority of our discretionary spending, we can't count it. That's fine. That seems normal.
But I'm sure their motives are pure.
Yeah. Their motives are always pure, right? That's the punchline. We're doing good somewhere, we swear to God. You might not ever see it with your own eyes, but we're doing it.
Trust us.
Trust us. I
So
pledge allegiance to the flag.
I pledge allegiance to the dollar.
Yeah.
So in this new banner, I put the loss of $2.3 to $2.6 trillion from the Pentagon as one of the motives for 9/11, because in July 16th, Rumsfeld testified before the House Appropriations Defense Subcommittee that they couldn't find $2.6 trillion.
That's
But
amazing.
The figure you hear more because it was given by Rumsfeld to also in testimony before Congress. September 10, 2001, Rumsfeld testifies that they can't find $2.3 trillion of the Pentagon budget.
Are you serious? Wow. Okay.
In sworn testimony before Congress the day before 9/11.
That's incredible. Wow.
And you know who was working in the part that got struck by the missile, not a plane, at the Pentagon?
Rumsfeld.
No, the brass was on the opposite side. That was the audit and accounting department.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right.
And now we're going to give a little tease to the 911 means, which will be our next one next week. At that time, the controller of the Pentagon was practicing Orthodox Jew and dual citizen of the United States and Israel, Dov Zakheim.
Yeah.
Dov Zakheim. And his, I think it was grandfather, was in a far-right militant Zionist youth group that then became one of the Jewish terrorist groups during the British Mandate phase of Palestine. But we will certainly get into the role of Zionism in 9/11 in the means part. So that's just another little tease.
Yeah.
Okay, here's another reason. There's a certain delicious little substance that the austere Taliban stopped virtually all production of in Afghanistan when they took over. Opium, which goes together like peanut butter and jelly with intelligence.
Well, I mean, look at the French Connection Vietnam situation, man. They really love opium wars in China. They really, really love heroin and cocaine and flying it around. Like, it's been going on for a long time. Doesn't matter if it's a plane, it's a boat, if it's a fucking camel in the desert, these guys for a really long time have loved controlling the transport and sale of drugs. Like, that's Afghanistan went on for 20 years. What can any average American say? What the fuck happened over there for 20 years? Afghanistan literally can fucking buy a drink at a bar in this country. That's nuts. Like, I mean,
the American occupation can go buy a drink.
yeah.
It's that old. And
I mean, it's not rocket science, man.
I might have been one of the 80 people in America that read even a portion of the Washington Post's actual recent excursion into investigative journalism.
The Afghanistan paper. That was the best thing they've done the last
20 years.
Yeah, since
nobody read it.
The Nixon. Yeah, since the Nixon thing.
Watergate. Yeah, and it caused no splash at all. But within months, from Rumsfeld down, they're saying, fuck, we don't know why we're here. We don't know what to target. We don't know how to get out. I mean, say what you will about Colin Powell, the Powell Doctrine, have a clear goal, overwhelming force, and have a clear exit strategy.
No.
Makes fucking sense. But the Afghan papers, within months, they're, well, we don't even know what we're doing here. But you say it goes back a long time? Well, let's see how far back it goes, Mark.
Yeah.
Some of America's greatest family fortunes were from the opium trade with China.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
Astor. Forbes. We started off with John Forbes Carey saying the World Trade Center was brought down in controlled fashion. His words.
Yeah.
The Russell family, who founded Skull and Bones at Yale.
Mm-hmm.
The elite fraternity that has it's like 15 people a year, and it's generating people at the commanding heights of intelligence, finance, politics. The Delano family, as much as we might love FDR's New Deal and his administration in general, the D is for Delano, and their family's money came from opium too.
Mm-hmm.
And the Perkins families. And then these all become the blue blood Brahmins of old school prestige in Boston.
That's right.
And that's the elite establishment that the Kennedys have to kick up against as the upstarts.
That's right. Yeah. As the crass new money.
Crass new money.
Yeah.
So opium, heroin, coke, we hinted at it with Iran-Contra. These have all been sources of off-the-books financing for intelligence and covert operations forever.
Forever. Yep.
You know, we can go through some of them. You brought up the French Connection. That was the Corsicans mob heroin operations near Marseille.
That's
France.
right. Mm-hmm.
And American intelligence made the trade. You prevent that important port from becoming communist, which was plausible at that time. You keep Marseille from going commie, and we'll let you run all the drugs you want.
That's right.
Another one of our favorite geopolitical historians, Alfred McCoy, he started his career with drug trafficking in Southeast Asia. Mm-hmm. And that was a former Kuomintang, the losing side of the Chinese Civil War, the side that lost to Mao and the communists. Mm-hmm. Some scattered to Taiwan, some scattered to the Golden Triangle, that area between Myanmar, Thailand, and Laos.
Well,
And
and before you go further, shout out to Alfred McCoy, like
he's the man.
another company man. I mean, another company man that at the end of his career is just getting it out there and telling the truth so he
Yeah.
can die in peace. Like that's another guy's work that should be paid attention to.
Alfred McCoy, Andrew Basovich,
Yeah, McGovern.
McGovern, Scott Ritter.
It just
He's only 60. Late.
he's Ritter's a kid by those guys' measure. Chalmers is already dead, but he was telling the truth.
Yeah.
I mean, who was Cornell's West mentor? Sheldon Wallen. He's already dead. His
Inverted
work should be.
totalitarianism, a corporate coup d'etat in slow motion.
Yeah, I mean, these men deserve to have their work paid attention to, because as this thing really gets squirrely and begins to wind down, and BRICS becomes more and more not only relevant, but as the actual innovator of whatever this next century is going to look like. And I think that's what's scary to people in Britain and the United States, is that how long they've been lied to, they don't want to deal with it, and how irrelevant they're becoming so fast. If you would have told me Germany was going to deindustrialize and financialize at any point in my life, I would have been like, what are you talking about? You're crazy. I would have been like, you are a crazy person and you don't know what's going on at all. And here it is happening right in front of our face. Like it's happening so fast. But the truth tellers should be paid attention to.
Yeah, big ups to them. So we can just throw out a little more historical tidbits of how drugs have been used by intelligence to prove that it was a motive. We did the French Connection, Kuomintang in the Golden Triangle. So that's Air America CIA pilots trafficking heroin through Vietnam and Laos during the Vietnam War, and we bombed more ordnance was dropped on Laos than in all of World War II, I think it is.
Yeah.
Jesus Christ. And then another was
Cambodia. No, Kissinger and McNamara never said anything about how bad Cambodia was getting bombed. I mean, just
some new stuff just came out about Cambodia, and someone was trying to bring it up with Kissinger now, and he got all salty. Oh, I thought this was going to be about my 100th birthday, not bringing up all of this old nonsense.
Yeah.
You know, I would love to see him in jail for just one symbolic day, at least. I know
if he had any self-respect, he would make it happen voluntarily.
Yeah, the last really great example is Iran-Contra. The main guy for that is Gary Webb, journalist. His book, Dark Alliance, successor airlines to Air America are bringing in coke from Central America and sending arms down to Central America. And then they give it to Freeway Ricky Ross, and he sells it through Compton.
Good old Ollie North, doubling down. Wow, man.
Yeah, in the Iran-Contra hearings, Ollie North goes, I thought it was a pretty neat idea.
You said it just like him. He said that.
And he still looked really boyish at that time.
Yeah. Oh.
He was like 40 and looked like he's 20.
Yeah, that was classic. But his hair was great.
There's people like Oliver North, Christian Coalition, Ralph Reed, and Richard Gates, who was a honcho at the CIA as a young man and then defense secretary for Bush and Obama. There's some people that they look 25 until they're 45.
Yeah.
And then their evil catches up with them, and by 50, they look 50.
Yeah.
So let's take stock of how much the Taliban actually stopped opium production in Afghanistan.
Yeah, please.
When they took power, the country was producing 80% of the world's supply of heroin. After 2002, after the American invasion, estimated opium production was back up to 4,500 tons of opium.
Yeah.
Just within a year, right away.
Instantaneously. They already knew what the deal was.
So now we can start going in. These ones I call kind of like fringe benefits. These aren't really the deep motives, but there's one that's kind of compelling because it deals with hard money. There was a certain amount of gold and silver in World Trade Centers 1 and 2, Mark. Let's itemize exactly how much. 1.8 tons of gold and 935.7 tons of silver were stored in the vaults beneath World Trade Center 4.
Yeah.
By Scotia Mocatta, the Bullion and Metals Division of the Bank of Nova Scotia. It's gone.
Yeah.
Also, the COMEX Metal Trading Department of the New York Mercantile Exchange kept 12 tons of gold and 800,000 ounces of gold on behalf of others in vaults beneath World Trade Center 5.
Yeah.
As well as 102 million ounces of silver. It's gone.
All connected by service tunnels. And there was a huge tunnel running out of Building 7 that dropped.
And when we talk about 911 means, of course, there's Bush connections and deep state connections to the security firms, of course.
Yeah.
So just judging by prices then, gold prices spiked $6 the day after 9/11 to $280 an ounce. It's been hovering around 2,000 an ounce for a while now. But even then, at 280, all that gold, $437 million.
Right.
That's in 2000 money.
Right.
Okay. Now, another fringe benefit was they got rid of a pesky fella, John O'Neill. He was a leading counterterrorism guy for the FBI, and he had been on the case of bin Laden for a long time. And, I think at the top level of the alphabet agencies, they work for the people that make money funding both sides of war.
Sure.
But there are a few people, even at the top, that are not in that club.
Right.
That are doing what the citizens think that agency does. And I get the impression that this was one of the honest guys in the FBI.
Yeah, that does happen.
And after the 1993 World Trade Center bombing, what they called the Detectives for Wall Street, an agency called Kroll, Kroll,
Yeah.
They were called in by the Port Authority of New York to oversee a major revamping of the security at 9/11. And the FBI's O'Neill, who had been on the trail for years, Osama's trail for years, he resigned in July 2001 in protest over all of the obstructions that he felt he was getting, probably due to the influence of the oil companies at the highest levels of American government. Well, a guy from the Kroll agency, Jerome Hauer, actually, let's use O'Neill's own words. He resigned because, quote, the main obstacles to the investigation of Islamic terrorism were U.S. oil corporate interests and the role played by Saudi Arabia in it.
Well, there it is.
That's from O'Neill's mouth. So the firm that did the security revamp after the 1993 bombing, and there's a video on Rumble. And dear five listeners, we are on Rumble, we are on BitChute, we are on Odyssey, we are on Local, and we will continue to put our stuff out on multi-platforms. But on Rumble, there is a video of just a tape machine playing that purports to be a conversation between an Egyptian military officer and his what seems to be FBI handlers about how he's the Egyptian officer is putting the bomb in the basement of World Trade Center 1993. And he's saying, FBI guy, I want more money. But this is part of why I developed my theory that international terrorism might just be an extension of using informants and operatives domestically. Because you get an Egyptian officer to plant the bomb, and then you just blame that blind cleric.
That's right.
So the company that oversaw the security revamp, one of their principals, their directors, Jerome Hauer, who had managed Mayor Giuliani's Office of Emergency Management, another tenant of World Trade Center 7, Jerome Hauer is the guy that invited John O'Neill from the FBI to be head of security at the World Trade Center. His first day of work was September 11th. John O'Neill did not make it home that night.
Yeah.
Now we get to the last of the kind of fringe benefits motives, not the biggest motives, but these people are operating at the highest levels of finance. Why not do some complicated moves and just make a few extra million, a little fold money?
The insurance policy was pretty garish.
So we're almost done. This is the last section. So Bush is only head of CIA for about a year. He leaves in 1976. He becomes a director at his friend Joe Albritton's Houston Interstate Bank. Houston. H.W. Bush is the center of power.
Right.
Now there is another bank called Riggs Bank. They advertise themselves as, quote, the most important bank in the most important city in the world, because their client base is the diplomatic corps of DC.
Mm-hmm.
That's back then, that was the only group that they served.
Sure.
And one of their subsidiaries was J. Bush & Co., operated by Jonathan Bush, a brother of H.W. Bush. In 1980, a young fella named Carter Peace, he was in his 20s at this time, but he was the financial co-chairman for George H.W.'s presidential run. At that time, Beast met HW's partner, Alberton, just as Alberton was buying in to Riggs Bank. Carter Beast started his career in 1978 at Alex Brown and Sons. Can you hear this, NSA, or do you want me to speak up?
Yeah. Yeah, they're not going to like this part.
When I start talking about the laws and the financial machinations,
Well, that's where it counts, right? When you start going through corporate structure and accounting, I mean, no normal person finds that, pays attention to that, thinks about that. But that's where the sausage is made. That's
Well,
why what you're doing matters.
dig this sausage. Beast,
Yeah.
financial co-chair of HW's presidential campaign, started his career at Alex Brown and Sons in 1978, became a partner in 1984. His mentor was A.B. Buzzy Krongard, CEO of Alex Brown, who would later be deputy director of the CIA on 9/11.
Yep.
And this guy, this Houston banker, Alberton, he would eventually control 41% of Riggs stock.
Mm-hmm.
Beast becomes a Riggs executive in 1998. Here's the chain of custody for all the stock puts.
That's what people, need to understand.
Here's the chain of custody.
Mm-hmm.
And in 1997, Bankers Trust buys Alex Brown and Son, Krongard's firm.
Yeah.
Then, as a part of the merger, he becomes vice chairman of Bankers Trust -AB Brown, one of the 20 banks named by Senator Carl Levin as being connected to money laundering.
Yeah.
In 1998, Deutsche Bank bought Bankers Trust. So you see, 1997, Bankers Trust buys Alex Brown and Sons. 1998, Deutsche Bank buys Bankers Trust. It's through Deutsche Bank that these puts were made, and I would hazard a guess, not just Deutsche Bank in general, but the subsidiary Alex and Brown, run by the deputy director of the CIA on the day of 9/11.
Yeah, there it is.
You know, before joining the CIA, because, you know, who doesn't believe in public service?
Yeah.
Krongard's final position with Bankers Trust was to oversee private client relations.
Yeah, I bet. It's the golden parachute always comes from overseeing private client relationships. I mean, it doesn't get a lot better than that, man.
So you got Krongard, a bit older, operating at the highest level. You have a trusted lieutenant, Carter Beast, who's going to do what he's told to do.
Yeah.
And let's look at what they might have done. Because they put stock puts on all a large number of companies that would stand to tank if the towers fell.
Yeah.
So 4,744 put options, betting it'll go down, were put on United Airlines stock.
Mm-hmm.
September 6th and 7th.
Yeah.
Dramatic abnormality in sales.
That's
purchased through the A.B. Brown branch of Deutsche Bank.
Mm-hmm.
Who else was sold short? All the people that insured the building.
Yeah.
Merrill Lynch, Morgan Stanley, Munich Re, reinsurance, AXA Re, an insurance firm that owned 25% of American Airlines.
Yeah.
These were all sold short for 4 working days before 9/11.
Wow.
On September 10, American Airlines had 4,516 puts. That's just folding money, Mark.
Yeah.
That
And
is
I
just,
mean, Deutsche's been facilitating this stuff for so long, to the point where they were about to be publicly thrown under the bus within the last 30 months. And now no one's talking about it. Deutsche, by any measure, should have folded like a year and a half ago. And they just magically made that go away. Everybody's been Ukraine this, China that, war this. Deutsche should have folded a year and a half or 2 years ago. and they've been they've been at the forefront of what you just laid out for a really long time. And now the Germans are deindustrializing and financializing, and their Credit Agricole, like the French, the Paris, the French bank, that's at like 425% of debt to GDP. Deutsche Bank was in the same scenario, and now that's just not going to happen anymore. I mean, it's such a cool thing when you lay these things out chronologically in order and do the who, what, when, where, how, why. Because I think it allows people to see that don't have the time to pay attention to things at this level or be able to give it away once they do. I think it's just so important for people to understand the way that you lay things out, these micro situations which turn into macro. It's really important.
and perhaps we can end on another comparison between capitalism and politics at the highest level and the mafia.
Yeah.
Certain offers that can't be refused.
Sure.
Deutsche Bank probably don't fail, even though they should, by typical economic analysis. Because like mafia people, they're made men.
Mhm.
They're untouchable.
Yeah.
And then in about 2005, 2006, Riggs Bank was convicted of like the wife of a Saudi diplomat was giving checks to someone like $2,000 every month, and then they were terrorist funding. Riggs is going to take one for the team.
Yeah. Right.
And then so they Riggs lost its entire diplomatic corps business, was sold to some nondescript financial company that I don't even remember, like some regional bank or something.
Sure.
Cast to the winds, having outlived its usefulness. And then a year later, Carter Beast committed suicide.
How convenient. Oh, the good old Epstein suicide.
Gary Webb, the San Jose Mercury News journalist who actually used the internet for investigative journalism in one of the first great cases of such work being done, in the sense that he put all of the documentation online in the mid-90s. The web had only been around for a couple of years at that point.
Sure. Yeah.
And then he put out his book, Dark Alliance, and then it kind of killed his journalistic career because Washington Post, New York Times, LA Times, they circled the wagons, said he was a nut, conspiracy theorist.
Nut job. Yeah.
The documentation's all there. It doesn't matter. It's the court.
Yeah.
The court of elite opinion. And then Mr. Webb met an untimely demise. Unfortunately, also committing suicide.
Uh-huh.
But the manner in which he chose to take his own life was a particularly
unusual
one that challenged the typical laws of physics and physiology.
Uh-huh.
He shot himself in the face twice.
I mean, I consider myself a tough guy. I think I would have a very hard time shooting myself in the face twice. Ow! I mean, unless you never touch the gun.
I'm going to steel myself up. I've got the grit. Okay, got it. Okay.
Even if you never touched a gun before, it's going to be extremely hard to shoot yourself in the face twice and get away with it. I mean, oh man. Yeah, that's a tough one. That's, I don't know about that one.
So there it is, my man, Mark. That's my analysis of the motive of 9/11.
It's all there, brother. We got to keep her going.
Yeah, let's do motive means next week. Yep.
Great show.
All right. Because I like to do impressions so much, perhaps we can, and it's my podcast, so I'll indulge myself.
Yeah.
You come to me on the day of my daughter's wedding, asking me to commit murder. I ask for justice. You ask me to commit murder. I will give you this justice that you seek. It's my gift to you on the day of my daughter's wedding. But someday, I will come to you and I will make a request.
Mm-hmm.
I will make you an offer. I will make you an offer you can't refuse.
Yeah.
And on that stirring note, this has been yet another edition of The Hard Line According to Stone Fruit with my partner in crime. Discovery.
Yeah. Truth is crime. I agree with that, unfortunately.
Wrong thinking. Okay, thank you, 5 listeners and NSA. Peace out.